Good evening. My name is Rod Smola. I am the president of the Vermont Law and Graduate School, and I welcome all of you who are here in person and those who are watching virtually to this important exercise in our democratic process. We're honored today to have two of the candidates for Vermont's lone seat in the United States House of Representatives, Senator Becca Balint and Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray. Senator Balint represents Windham County in the Vermont State Senate, and she currently serves as the president pro tempore of the Senate of Vermont. And Lieutenant Governor Molly Gray is a lawyer, a graduate of this law school, and of course, the Lieutenant Governor. We thank you both, Lieutenant Governor and Senator, for taking time. I know it's a hectic time for both of you, but this is an important exercise in our democratic process, and we're so pleased that you can be here with us. The seat, the sole seat in small states like Vermont in the United States House of Representatives is always enormously important, but it could not be more important in the times we live in, particularly for matters near and dear to the mission and the soul of this law and graduate school, matters relating to the climate crisis and social justice reform. We'll be hearing from a distinguished panel of interlocutors, but let me say it is again a delight to have you both with us and a delight to have everyone in the audience participating. So I will now introduce the moderator tonight, my colleague, Professor Peter Teachout.
Thank you very much, President Smola. My name is Peter Teachout, and I'm going to be serving as the moderator for the debate this evening. As moderator, my role is to lay out the basic format and the rules of the game for tonight's debate. During the debate tonight, the candidates will be asked to respond to three types of questions. First, there will be questions put to the candidates by members of the panel, which I will introduce in short order. Second of all, each candidate will be allowed to ask the other candidate one question. And finally, if we have time, we will provide an opportunity for questions that have been submitted by members of the audience tonight, which will be selected and then presented also by the panelists. I don't know how we're going to do on time, but at least that's what we're planning to do. So in response to each question, each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond. If there are follow-up questions, 45 seconds. We're going to try to stick to that schedule. I have here as my associate, Callum LaFrance, a second-year student who's playing the very important role of timekeeper. He has in his hands two flags, a yellow one and a red one. If he lifts up the yellow flag, that means you have 15 seconds before you have to stop. If he holds up the red flag, that means you have to stop. Think of it as the end of a law school examination. That's it. You're out and finished. So at the end of the session tonight, each of you will be given an opportunity, again, 90-second opportunity to make a closing statement. So with that background, let me introduce our panelists for this evening. First of all, on my immediate right, second-year JD student Clara Derby will be asking questions about environmental law and policy. Next to her, on her right, is Professor Stephanie Clark, who's the director of the Vermont Law and Graduate School Center for Justice Reform, and she'll lead the discussion with respect to justice reform. And the two panelists will split questions that are related to higher education issues. And so with that, I'd like to ask the candidates to make their opening remarks. Prior to the beginning of this evening, the candidates drew straws, and Senator Balint, you drew the straw for the first speaker tonight, so without any further ado, why don't you go ahead and get us started.
Thank you all for being here. I have to say, my wife went to VLS and spent a lot of time with her in the library here as she was staying up late, dealing with law review issues. And I also had the great fortune of being able to sit in on Cheryl Hanna's classes on evidence before she passed away. And those were classes that I used in my middle school classes to teach them about government and about how the law works. So just thinking of her tonight. So I'm an experienced legislator. I'm a parent of 2, and I'm also a longtime middle school teacher. And I always like to tell people that, because if you can teach middle school, you can do just about anything. It is a tough time in most people's lives and their parents, and I really sought to make my classroom a place where everyone felt included, where everyone felt supported. My middle school years were some of the toughest years for me personally. It's a time when I was figuring out that I was gay, and wanted to create a place in my classroom where everybody felt supported. That's the same lens that I brought into the State House with me, thinking about all of the families and the students that I'd had over the years, and spent my time, 8 years in the Senate, working hard to support working families here in Vermont. I'm very proud of the work that I've done here. I'm really looking forward to speaking with all of you tonight and hearing from you at the end, and I hope I will earn your support. Thank you so much for coming out tonight.
Thank you, Senator Balint. Lieutenant Governor Gray.
Good evening, Vermont Law School and community members. Thank you so very, very much for having us. I'm glad we're doing this. It's a pleasure to be back on a campus that gave me so much as a student, and to be back with a community that has given me so much as an adjunct professor. And I remember this spring speaking at the law school graduation as lieutenant governor, and I told students Vermont law school graduates can go anywhere. So I hope being up here tonight and running for Congress is a small testament to that. Why am I running? I do believe that I'm the right person at the right time with the right experience to serve as Vermont's Congresswoman. I've spent a half-decade working in Congress, both for Peter Welch and for the International Committee of the Red Cross and Congressional Affairs. I know how it works. I know the difference between authorization and appropriations bill. I also have a law degree, and I know in some rooms that's not popular, but in this room I think it's pretty popular, and certainly right now we need good lawyers. I've served as an assistant attorney general, as a law clerk on the Second Circuit Court of Appeals. We need good lawyers ready to counteract this court and ready to codify everything. We need Congress to work. I've also worked overseas and know that, be it with the war raging in Ukraine or what we're seeing day in and day out, be it climate change, we need leaders ready to make smart foreign policy decisions. So I look forward to talking about that diversity of experience tonight, telling you more about myself, and earning your support. Thank you.
Thank you both. I want to say just a word about in-audience questions. If you, during the course of the debate tonight, have a question you would like to have addressed to the candidates, raise your hand and a member of the staff will come around and give you a piece of paper, and you can write the question on a piece of paper and then pass it to your right. And then we will, if we have time, we'll select from among those questions and have the panelists address them in the third round of tonight's debate. So, without any further ado, thank you both for your opening comments. I'd like to turn it over now to Clara Derby, who will ask you questions about environmental law and policy.
Good evening. Thank you so much to both of you for being here. Starting with the topic of climate and energy, Senator, this question will go to you first, and then Lieutenant Governor, you'll have an opportunity to answer as well.
May I ask a question first about how the questions will be asked so that it's not always going to me first?
Yes, so it'll go to you first, and then Lieutenant Governor, and then I will start with you for the next question, then it'll go back to question.
Thank you for the clarification.
All right, so right off the bat. Under the Paris Agreement, the United States has pledged to reduce its carbon emissions by 50% by the year 2030. What actions should Congress take to achieve that goal?
So it's very clear to me that coming from Windham County, we have a climate crisis that's here now. Ever since Hurricane Irene hit Windham County, with every single storm that comes through, our low-lying areas and our most vulnerable Vermonters are the ones that are bearing the brunt of climate change now. The other thing that I've noticed is that Vermonters, as I talk to them, are feeling quite hopeless and paralyzed by the way that we're talking about climate change, and they feel like there's too much pressure being put on individual Vermonters to do something about it. So I'm going to be someone who's looking to the federal government to make very large investments in helping regular Vermonters transition off of fossil fuels. We can do that, we can fund that by making sure we're actually placing windfall profits taxes on fossil fuel companies, ending subsidies, making sure that we renew the solar tax credit that is about to lapse. It was first very robust under George W. Bush and has been decreased with every presidential administration since then. And I want to make sure that we have our eyes on the prize. We have had a robust solar industry here in Vermont. We've enabled lots of communities to adopt solar panels into not just their homes, but also town buildings. But we know that it's going to take money, real money, to allow regular people to do that, and we shouldn't be shaming people that they're not able to do it on their own.
Thank you. And at any point, if you need the question repeated, just ask the Lieutenant Governor.
The question was about the Paris Climate Agreement and what Congress can do to fulfill our commitments. First is showing up consistently. It's not good when with one administration we're there, and I remember in June of 2018 when Trump said, we're done with the Paris Agreement, which sets us back. So we're now starting from a place. I'm glad that I'm very, very proud to be endorsed by Todd Stern, who's one of the chief negotiators of the Paris Agreement. But the question is, what do we need to do? One, it's showing up. Two, we need to make sure at the federal level that we're investing in weatherization, we're investing in heat pumps, we're investing in solar, as Senator Balint mentioned, but doing everything we can to not only support Vermonters and what we've done here in the state with the Global Warming Solutions Act, but support similar programs across the country, removing the barriers to participation for every Vermonter and every American. Certainly this includes ending fossil fuel subsidies quickly and making sure that we're rapidly investing in renewables. But one piece I think that we don't talk enough about and is central to my campaign is workforce development. We hear in the state right now that we want to weatherize homes, we want to deploy solar, we want to install more electric vehicle charging stations, but we actually don't even have the workforce to be able to do that. So not only is it strengthening our electric grid, not only is it investing in the programs to make it possible for Vermonters to make this transition and for us to meet our goals, but also building the workforce to do that, which means investing in our trades, investing in the next generation, and making that workforce possible, a climate workforce.
Thank you. And sticking with you, Lieutenant Governor, a common objection to increasing our reliance on renewable energy sources is the high upfront cost. Do you support leveling the playing field with initiatives that make it more expensive to emit carbon, such as a carbon tax or cap-and-trade programs or other methods?
I think the biggest challenge with a carbon tax at this stage is not every Vermonter can access a heat pump. Not every Vermonter can afford to weatherize a home right now. Not every Vermonter can purchase an electric vehicle. And so until that is possible for me, I would not support a carbon tax. So what does that look like? I mean, part of this dovetails on my response to the last question, but we have the Global Warming Solutions Act here in the state. We've invested through federal funding. People say, why are you running for Congress? Because as a small state, we have to have federal dollars to be able to supercharge, to grow the programs that we have here. So doing more and more to expand access to weatherization programs, making sure more and more Vermonters, including my brothers who say, Molly, we can't tow anything with an F-150, right? They're on the farm, they're trying to do that. They want to be part of the solution, but don't have the tools. So my hope, and I think the hope of anyone running for Congress right now, the plan has to be removing the barriers and ensuring that as a nation, we are signaling to consumers across the country that this is the direction we're going, it's going to happen, and we're going to help you get there. Congressman Welch, who I worked for, has been a champion on energy efficiency nationally on the Energy and Commerce Committee, and certainly if I get to choose my committee, I hope it's that one so I can carry on his legacy and work and focus on this specifically.
Sure, just a quick follow-up question. You mentioned consumers and the concerns there, but on the industry level, where do you see Congress imposing things such as carbon tax or a cap-and-trade program? You see it all around that
Yeah, just to be really direct, I don't oppose consideration of a cap and trade program or a carbon tax, but I don't feel like we can't fairly discuss that until we remove the barriers to full participation for our first and worst communities, for our low-income Vermonters. And right now, most Vermonters cannot afford to weatherize a home, to purchase a heat pump, and to get into an electric vehicle. And I think that's where our focus needs to be first.
Sure, thank you. Senator Balint, turning to you, do you need the question repeated?
No, I don't. Thank you.
Thank you.
So we can generate quite a bit of income to do the work that we need to do through steep taxes on fossil fuel companies, ending federal subsidies. We also can, hold corporations accountable for what they've done in the same way that we held big tobacco accountable for the harm they'd done. So there are ways to get the funds we need to make this transition. I am much more interested in a carbon dividend than a carbon tax. A carbon tax tends to be quite regressive, and that worries me for Vermonters on fixed incomes, and it forces the same costs on the poor as it does for the rich, and that's not fair. But we need a mechanism to move people in the way that they do their business day to day that is meaningful, but does not directly impact those that are most at risk. So for those of you who aren't familiar with the carbon dividend, it is taxing corporations at the source, but they're returning those dividends back to people in relationship to where they fall on the economic spectrum. So if you are someone who is in the lower income, you're going to be getting more back in dividends. It's going to be more meaningful for you because of the cost that you incur trying to get to work, whereas you're going to impose higher tax on folks who are among the most wealthy. So I feel like it's much more fair, and it's something that I would certainly be interested in investigating if I were to be in Congress. Thanks.
Thank you, and sticking with you, turning to the subject of wildlife protection. Wildlife species are being driven to extinction by humans at a rate so catastrophic that scientists have called it the sixth extinction. The Fish and Wildlife Service and the Bureau of Land Management have been heavily influenced by consumptive users like ranchers and hunters and extractive industries like agriculture and mining, to the exclusion of wildlife and environmental stakeholders. Do you think the mission and governance of these agencies and their advisory committees should be more inclusive to better address the needs of wildlife? If so, how do you propose to do that?
Really appreciate the question. My wife is from Wyoming, and we spend a lot of time out there, and we talk a lot about ranchers, the use of land, the use of water, and certainly as we see the West burning, the issues of who gets to control the water are critical. The way that I think about this is completely in relationship to the question on climate change. We know that forest blocks are helping us to sequester carbon. So even on that issue alone, we should really be directing the attention of our Forest Service to making sure that we are able to have healthy forests that sequester more carbon. And can you the second part of the question was, would I support, so I'll make sure I get it right.
Yeah, so the core of the question is, do you think the mission and governance of these agencies and their advisory committees should be more inclusive to better address the needs of wildlife? So having more wildlife protection and environmentalists.
Absolutely. We need to not incentivize extraction industries. We need to stop doing that. That is something that is creating the climate catastrophe. So yes, there needs to be a recalibration.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, the answer is yes, absolutely. What I hear every day as I travel the state, but also what we see with climate change right now, is that animal health and the well-being of our environment is a signal of where we are in the health and safety of our communities and our state, our country, and our world. So where we don't have that inclusivity, we're missing out on key indicators of our own safety, wellness, and the health and safety of our communities. So I absolutely support strengthening the Endangered Species Act. We've seen Republicans either not pay attention to it or push it to the side or try to draw it back. Absolutely thinking about ANWR and making sure that we're thinking about drilling still today. It's an issue that kind of comes up and then it comes back down and then it goes back up. But I believe as a state, we've always had strong, thoughtful representation. I think we're all environmentalists inherently, and thinking about our engagement with our land, with our environment, it's connected to our own sense of place and well-being. So I believe it's a very, very important discussion, and we need more leaders who are going to be champions for the environment in Congress.
Thank you. And you dovetailed wonderfully into the next question on animal cruelty and environmental justice. The confined animal feeding operation, or CAFO, model of producing meat, eggs, and dairy is considered unsustainable by advocates for clean water and air, environmental justice, and animal welfare. Neither the USDA nor EPA have made serious efforts to hold producers accountable for the externalities of intensive animal agriculture. With the Farm Bill up for renewal in the next session of Congress, what measures would you like to see included for agricultural reform?
Where to begin? I grew up on a vegetable and dairy farm, still run by my family, my brothers, a small Jersey herd, cows, pigs, chickens, and I share that just because I know what it's like to raise an animal, to care for it, and then also to go through the process of slaughtering. And in the world today, to think about that process being at such a large scale that we lose connection, that we obviously see tremendous animal cruelty, we see tremendous pollution because of, and harms, environmental harms because of large-scale agricultural practices. Again, I think it comes back to, one, where do we stand? What are our values as consumers? What are our values in terms of our communities? But also, how are we thinking about our long-term resilience? And be it with climate change, be it with food security, be it with economic security, recognizing that they're all connected, and we need to bring things back to a scale where we're focusing on the humanity of animals. We're thinking about where our food is coming from, what are the externalities, and that we're paying for them, and recognizing that our long-term resilience is linked to that. So absolutely prepared to have those discussions as an ag leader and thinking about a reformed farm bill that really reflects the priorities of our state, but also what I believe the priorities of our nation should be.
Thank you. Senator Balint?
So one of the things that I think you learn really quickly when you're in the legislature is when you are talking about schools in Vermont, when you're talking about farms in Vermont, when you're talking about businesses, our scale is different from in any other state. So our farms are essentially small businesses, and even our largest farms would only qualify as a medium-sized farm in another state. And so we always have to be looking to see, how does the Farm Bill address the issues that our farmers have here in Vermont? And what I hear as I travel around talking to farmers is that omnibus bill does not actually address the conditions on the ground here in Vermont. So we need a course correction about milk prices. We need a course correction around how we incentivize farmers to have resiliency practices, and instead of punishing them for transitioning, making sure that they have the resources they need to transition. And one of the things that, you didn't ask this, but I think it's essential to making sure that we have farming continue to be a viable industry here, because we all want local food, or we say we do. We have to make farming viable by giving farmers the basic supports that all small businesses need, which is childcare and affordable health care, and making sure that they can hire migrant workers and make sure those workers are protected and have safe housing. And so it is so clear to me that the Farm Bill is really designed for farm agribusiness in other states and not for the needs of our farmers here. Was that a red? Okay. Okay.
Okay, thank you very much. Before we turn to the justice reform questions, I'd like to ask members of the audience to think very carefully about questions you would like to have the candidates answer. And if you have a question you would like to have them answer, raise your hand. Somebody from the staff will come around and give you a piece of paper, and you can write the question down. It's really important that you feel free and encouraged to do so. So without any further ado, then we'll turn the questioning over to Professor Clark, who will ask questions about issues involving justice reform.
Thank you so much, Professor Teachout, and welcome Senator Balint and Lieutenant Governor Gray. Thank you for spending time with us this evening. As Professor Teachout said, I'm going to be asking some questions in a couple of categories on justice reform. The first is going to be on federal court reform, and we'll start with you this time with this set of questions, Lieutenant Governor. The first question then is, do you think federal courts should be reformed, and if so, how? Would you like to see the Congress do that?
This question's come up so much over the last month, of course, given the Roe decision, and it's kind of the 1-2 punch, right? First it was on guns and states' rights, and then it was on women's rights and with the Roe decision. I feel very strongly that, yes, there is space to consider court reform right now, but my biggest concern is what if Congress spends all of its time right now focus on term limits, focus on expanding the court, rather than focus on doing the work of legislating, which we need to happen immediately. We need leaders in Congress who are ready to help codify Roe, but it's not just Roe. It is all of the right to privacy rights that Professor Teachout taught us about in our constitutional law classes that we took for granted or presumed were settled law. So it's access to contraceptives, it's how you love, it's who you love. That is my biggest concern, that we have a Congress that's functioning. Fixing the court doesn't fix Congress. But if we're going to do two things to fix Congress right now, I believe it should be ending or fully reforming the filibuster so that legislation that gets through the House is actually getting through the Senate and becoming law, and then working to get rid of the Electoral College so that we have an executive branch that is responsive to the people. And that would be my focus.
Thank you. Senator Balint, the question to you, and if you'd like me to rephrase or to repeat it ever, just let me know.
Thank you. I think we have to get serious about court reform. I think we absolutely should be looking at term limits for federal judges and for folks who sit on the highest court of the land. And as I dig more into this issue and learn more about how many years a Supreme Court justice used to sit on the court, to sit on the court for about 15 years. Now many of them are sitting on the court for over a quarter of a century. And we have a 6-3 supermajority of conservatives right now. And the majority of them were seated by presidents who did not win, did not win the popular vote. And so I think we also should be willing to have the conversation of whether we expand the court. I'm not saying we should, but we should. It shouldn't be a taboo question for us to consider here. The other thing I would like us to look at is these are structures that were made by people. We, the people, can change the structures if they're not working for us. So we can decide that the number of cases heard by the shadow docket or the emergency docket at the Supreme Court could be limited to particular cases. We could also decide that supermajorities of the court would have to weigh in order to overturn precedent. So all of these things should be on the table, and I'll just say I'm still not over the fact that Merrick Garland is not on the Supreme Court.
Thank you, Senator. So the next several questions are going to be on criminal justice reform, and Senator, I'll stay with you for this next one. It has to do with sentencing reform. Prosecutors have routinely used mandatory minimum sentences to coerce plea deals and punish defendants for exercising their constitutional right to trial. This has significantly impacted people of color. If elected, would you support ending all federal mandatory minimum sentences?
Well, we know that we have a situation of mass incarceration right now in large extent because of the fact that we have mandatory minimums. And so I will give a strong yes with conditions, meaning there may be things that I'm not thinking about as I'm not an attorney, but I know that we're in this situation because, in large extent, because of the sentencing. So there is a bill that Cory Booker proposed, which was the Reverse Mass Incarceration Act, and is looking at the issue of what can we put in place to essentially repair this situation that was formed by mandatory minimums. And so one of the things that I know the federal government does well, which is it grants money to states for particular behavior. We could be changing the way that grants are handed down around criminal justice reform and really incentivizing states to make sure that fewer people are being incarcerated. And it's interesting, we have another colleague that sits with us often, he's not here tonight, and I know there is still an impulse into many Americans for having mandatory minimums on things like handgun possession or other issues that are making it feel so very unsafe for us. But when we go down that road, we know that people of color and the poor are the ones that are disproportionately impacted.
Thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor Gray.
Sure. I appreciate this question, and it's a tough one as we work to reform our criminal justice system. I don't support a blanket end to all mandatory minimum sentences. I do support a strong and robust review. And I'll share briefly, I was serving as an assistant attorney general. One of the first sentencing hearings that I went to with co-counsel, it was a moment where the victims were able to speak about what had happened. And I remember the defendant stood up and thanked the court and also thanked the attorneys, the prosecutors, for sending him to jail because in his mind, it was the only place where he was going to receive treatment for his substance use disorder. And I remember leaving thinking, this system is so broken. And if this is the outcome of sentencing, then we have it wrong. And I will always carry that with me. I do carry that with me now as Vermont's lieutenant governor. But I do strongly, strongly support sentencing reforms. It's just for those, I feel like there are particular crimes, be it homicide or certain heinous crimes, where we do have to have a floor.
Thank you, and I'm going to stay with you, Lieutenant Governor, and this next question has to do with bail reform. So a growing number of prosecutors oppose bail for nonviolent offenses. A number of jurisdictions have also enacted presumption against bail statutes. These statutes shift the burden onto the charged individual, requiring them to convince the court that bail is unnecessary to assure their appearance at future hearings, despite their constitutional presumption of innocence. If elected, would you support a federal bill that eliminates such presumption offenses and allows federal courts to make bail decisions on the individual factors of each case?
I don't support limiting bail in every single circumstance, but absolutely support comprehensive bail reform. We know that this is oftentimes a conversation between a prosecutor and a defense attorney, but then the judges also step in and have a lot of discretion to set bail. So if we could give better parameters, I don't believe that bail is necessary in every single circumstance and that reform is completely needed, but I don't agree with eliminating it completely.
Thank you.
Could you repeat the question?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank
It's
you.
a long one, I know.
It is a long one, yes.
So a growing number of prosecutors oppose bail for nonviolent offenses. A number of jurisdictions have enacted presumption against bail statutes. These statutes shift the burden onto the individual who's been charged, requiring them to convince the court that bail is unnecessary to assure their appearance at future hearings, despite their constitutional presumption of innocence. If elected, would you support a federal bill that eliminates such presumption offenses and allows federal courts to make bail decisions based on the individual factors of each case?
Thank you. So as a longtime legislator, I will say the devil's in the details, right? So when you say, would you support a bill, there are often other things attached to bills that move. So I just want to be clear on that it is clear to me when we look at the fact that low-income Americans, so poor Americans, make up 60% of our prison population, that we absolutely should be looking at bail reform. And so if I understand the question, yes, I would absolutely pursue that. If there is a presumption of innocence, then this should not be a hurdle that someone should have to clear. The other thing that I will say that I am seeing here in Vermont as I travel around is I know there is, especially in our larger cities, there is a sense that people are being arrested and then quickly being released back out on the street. This is the narrative right now. And that people are feeling like prosecutors, to some extent, are not doing the job the way that Vermonters would like them to do it. And what I want to say to that is, I think it is important for us to have bail reform, but we also have a responsibility as a state to make sure that there are services in the community to support people who are being released on bail. Because what's happening is the prosecutors, the police, the communities are being held accountable when there are other supports that are needed to support these people in communities. Hope that makes sense.
Thank you very much.
Yes.
So the last question that I have this evening is on restorative justice. And Senator, I'll stay with you for this question to start. What does restorative justice mean to you, and what role should it play in the justice system?
Really like this question because I think as I have met with different restorative justice programs around the state, not all are created equal. So it's a really important question. What does it look like? It looks like people having an opportunity to truly repair the harm done and re-enter the community. And oftentimes, and it goes back to the previous question, we often in Vermont say we support these things, and we support them in theory, but we don't invest enough money to make it a meaningful experience both for the person who has done the harm and the person who's been harmed. So what I would like to see around Vermont is for each community to have a robust restorative justice program that heals the harm, makes sure that people are paying restitution that's meaningful, which is not always economic, which is not always monetary. And so there are many supports right now that we need within communities so that people can feel safer, and this is one of them. And it's not just about an either or. We either fully fund law enforcement or we don't. We need to fully support law enforcement, and we also need these other systems of justice to be working alongside of them.
Thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor Gray.
Sure. And I wanted to, before I answer this question, just clarify on the last question that while I don't support eliminating cash bail, I do think that we have to remove subjectivity and recognizing that judges come with their own bias. And that's the challenge with bail, right? Where we have a clear set of factors, then we have judges operating from those factors and not from their own bias. And so I support that, but I don't support eliminating bail in every circumstance. But let's talk about restorative justice. You asked, what do I think restorative justice is? I think the most important part of that question is, what is justice? And restorative justice is about what does the victim of a harm believe justice is? And that's what's so powerful about restorative justice, that it's a victim-centered approach that brings into our conversation of either criminal justice or even with our kids in schools, trying to figure out how to bring a response to harm in a way that isn't through a system that often can't repair harm. I'll just share briefly. One, I'm deeply proud to be a product of the law school, but also when I was working in the Attorney General's office, I had a very, very challenging case. It was a St. Joseph's Orphanage investigation where we were looking at harms that occurred over 125 years here in Vermont. We couldn't prosecute because of statute of limitations. There were 6,000 kids who went through an orphanage. Dozens and dozens had harms and concerns. And we started a restorative inquiry, a way of providing some sort of restorative justice. And I know without question that here in Vermont, we're leading on restorative justice. We can continue to lead on restorative justice. We now have a national center on restorative justice. It's something I'm deeply passionate about. It's part of the reason I entered the law to begin with, because I believe that there's other ways to bring accountability and to bring response to harm, but it starts with the individual.
Thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you. We're now going to turn to the third type of question for tonight's debate, which are questions involving issues particularly pertinent to higher education and student lives. So both of our panelists will participate. Why don't we start, Clara, with you?
Yeah. just to say a few words about housing. So enrollment growth is a key goal of the VLGS strategic plan. Our ability to increase the residential student population is seriously hampered by a lack of quality, affordable housing. It is also a challenge in recruiting a talented and diverse faculty and staff. And because of the lack of affordable housing is also a national concern, we have 2 questions on that, and the Lieutenant Governor will start with you. What specific actions would you take in Congress to ameliorate the housing crisis in Vermont and other rural areas?
Where to begin? I mean, this is the #1 issue we hear across the state right now. Certainly as Lieutenant Governor, as I've traveled the state, it comes up again and again and again. And we've made incredible investments as a state through strong federal support. So what I know is that as a small state with a small tax base, we cannot make the massive investments that we need to make in housing because we just don't have the money. So that's where Congress comes in. What does that look like? It's investments in water and sewer, also right here in South Royalton in our communities where we need to have that infrastructure to be able to even build. It means building up and not out with an eye towards the future. Especially, I lived in Bethel during Hurricane Irene, and I remember jumping in my Saab and hightailing it to Barnard, and 2 houses next to me were washed away, right? We need to think about climate-resilient communities as well, but it's also weatherization. It's looking at the spectrum of housing, making sure that first-time home buyers still have the hope and promise of home ownership through supporting the LIFT Act, which is an important piece of legislation right now to get first-time home buyers into homes. But it is our #1 challenge, and I think our #1 opportunity as we look to grow our workforce, expand the student base here, of course, allow more faculty to come to campus and experience all that is South Royalton and all that is our beautiful state.
Thank you. And Senator?
So I have led on tackling the housing issue for many years in the Vermont legislature, and I have to give a shout out to Senator Clarkson, who's also here, my colleague on the Economic Development and Housing Committee. We've made historic investments in housing here in Vermont, and not just new builds, but rehabbing, building accessory dwelling units, and making it easier to build in downtown village centers. And yes, we need to do everything that we can to make it possible for towns like South Royalton and Tunbridge and Bethel to be able to build housing in those village centers. And some of that is about water and sewer upgrades, absolutely. Some of that is about making it easier here within Vermont for tax increment financing on the local level. There are many mechanisms that we can move. The important thing for me as a longtime educator, I taught in 4 different rural public schools in Vermont. If you don't have safe, clean housing, you are not starting on the same starting line as everybody else. I saw it in the health of my students and their families, and it is some of the most important work that I've done in the legislature, and I will continue to be a champion on housing going forward. We also have a very successful first-time home buyers program here in Vermont. Just want to give a shout out to it. You may not know it exists. We've reauthorized it many, many times. So as you can tell, I have religion about housing, and I will be a champion on this issue in Congress. Thanks.
Thank you, Senator. So we're going to stay on housing for this next question and talk a little bit about affordability. So when housing is found, it is typically so energy inefficient that heating, cooling, and other energy-related bills are unaffordable. How would you address this double whammy experienced by students in South Royalton and across the country? Senator, we'll stay with you first.
Yeah. I wish I could say there were an easy fix, and there's not, unfortunately. We have some of the oldest housing stock in the nation here in Vermont. And many of us know in our own homes how drafty they are. But we have, again, we've invested huge amounts of money in weatherizing lower and moderate income homes. And, as Lieutenant Governor said, we need to continue to hire for those positions so that we can really finish the work on weatherizing homes. Got a little phlegm in my throat here. But I feel like there's a first part to that question. I want to make sure I answer it.
Well, really the affordability.
The affordability issue, yes. And so wages, certainly for Vermonters, are something that I've been focused on here in Vermont for many years, increasing the minimum wage. But at the federal level, we have an unconscionable wealth gap. And that is one of the biggest problems that we have to address, is that it's not even just that housing prices have gone up so much and Vermonters are being priced out, is that we don't have a middle class anymore. We literally don't have a middle class anymore. So this is not an easy issue to deal with, but it's something I'm going to be very focused on.
Thank you. Lieutenant Governor?
I know what it's like to rent a home where utilities are included and to rent an apartment where utilities are not included. And I can tell you, of course, in Vermont, if utilities aren't included and you don't know what those utilities are going to be, it can be a long and incredibly expensive winter. So with recognition of that, and this I think goes back, not to belabor the point of some of the earlier questions, but we have a lot of incredible initiatives here in Vermont through energy efficiency, through Capstone, groups that are out helping Vermonters weatherize homes. And one is the workforce challenge. How do we incentivize, grow the workforce in those areas? But two, how do we make sure we really utilize federal support to weatherize homes, to make sure that more and more landlords can put heat pumps in? But also, heat pumps don't work if you don't have a good weatherized home. And finally, I don't want to say this, what I'm about to say, and have it be taken as if I'm not actively thinking about climate action right now. But we have to address LIHEAP. We have to make sure it's fully funded, to make sure that our renters and our landlords have support for heating assistance going into the winter. I have been pretty clear about the federal gas tax holiday. I do support that right now. I think that Vermonters are really suffering. We see it at the pump, we see it in food costs, we see it in heating costs as we look to the winter. And we can both be champions for climate action and also be champions for making sure that Vermonters and renters and landlords and working families have relief every single day as we make that transition.
Thank you.
Clara?
Thank you. Now turning to the issue that is forefront in my mind and many other students in the audience, student debt. What is your position? Oh, I'm sorry, Lieutenant Governor.
I'll take this one first.
So what is your position on student debt cancellation? Do you support the recently announced White House proposal to raise all debt for a third of borrowers and have it for another 20%, which would equal roughly $230 billion in total? Or is there another approach that you favor?
Yeah, I'd like to take a step back and just recognize I love the school. It has given me so much. It also gave me $125,000 in debt, which I was one of the lucky ones. But it's been a mortgage on my life, and I've heard other law school students say that as well. I've worked 2 jobs. While I was working as Assistant Attorney General, I was teaching here just to make ends meet, and also because I love the school, of course. But it's impacted the ability to buy a home, to think about having a family, and that is the reality. That is a reality for a lot of individuals. I am supportive of Biden's proposal to eliminate $10,000, but frankly, I don't think that's enough. I think we need to do more than that. What is the right number? I think requires more analysis and consideration. But my biggest concern is that if we work to eliminate a significant portion of student debt, and to make sure that especially those of us who are going into public service or going into jobs that aren't going to pay what we need to make to pay it off, but we need individuals to go into these positions. If we can't, we can really try to relieve some of that debt, but our biggest concern is we have to address higher education and what it means to be able to go to law school, to be able to receive a degree or a certification, or to come out of a trade school and to go into the workforce and to really thrive. So I don't see it just let's address student debt. It is how do we address our workforce crisis and higher education, which probably is a longer conversation.
Thank you. And Senator Balint?
Yes, we need to cancel a significant amount of student debt. I don't think canceling 10,000 is enough, given that we've got 45 million Americans who are holding $1.6 trillion in student debt. It is keeping people back from starting families, from buying homes, from being complete and full members of their communities. It's like a lodestone around their necks. I had significant student loan debt, but it's nothing, nothing compared to what so many college students here in Vermont are holding. And many folks will start college, not finish, so then they have no degree and debt. And I just want to say, this is a really easy way also for us to continue to try to close the racial wealth gap. Canceling student debt is a big step towards doing that, because we know brown and black Americans hold, on average, more student debt than white Americans. So this is also a really important step forward on closing the racial wealth gap. I think what I hear a lot in my work as a senator here in Vermont and talking to constituents is many of my older constituents do not fundamentally understand the level of debt that so many young people are carrying. And they'll say, well, I did it, I paid off my debt, why can't they do it? And what young people are doing today is very different. It's very different. Prices have gone up across the board, even when adjusted for inflation.
So thank you. That ends the first set of questions for the candidates this evening. Before we turn to the next element in our program tonight, I want to give you all one last chance to think about a question you would like to have our panelists address or ask the candidates tonight. So I'll give you maybe 3 minutes, if you've got one, to get one in. If you don't get one in that time, we're going to be too late. So with that background, we're now going to turn to the next element in our program tonight, in which each candidate is allowed to ask the other candidate one question. You'll have 30 minutes, excuse me, 30
All right, let's roll up our sleeves here.
for it, yeah. You'll have 30 seconds to ask the question and 90 seconds to respond. At the beginning of tonight, we had the candidates again draw straws, and Senator Balint, you again drew the short straw, the long straw, and so you get to ask the first question of Lieutenant Governor Gray.
Okay. Lieutenant Governor, after only about 8 months into your first year of elected service, you started to make plans to run for this office. And I have a record of service and achievement here in the legislature, and some of the work that I'm most proud of is the work that we did making sure that we codified reproductive rights here in Vermont. And so I'd like to know, what do you feel you've done to deliver on this really important issue for Vermonters?
Thank you for the question. And I always welcome an opportunity to explain and discuss my service to this state. First, let's just be honest, I don't think any of us expected Senator Leahy to retire. I certainly didn't, and when he did, my first thought was, what are we going to do without the chair of the Appropriations Committee as one of the states with the smallest population and with an aging workforce and a small tax base? And I think in any moment you have to think, do I have the qualifications? Do I have the experience? Am I the right person at the right time? And I got to yes. Yes, because of my work in Congress. Yes, because of my legal background. Yes, because during my time as lieutenant governor, I've been traveling the state, listening, understanding every single day what's happening, and feeling the totality of that experience brought me to the pace where I stepped forward, and that's when I made my decision. And I guess the questions about reproductive rights and protecting them. As a lieutenant governor, I'm not a part of the legislative branch, I'm part of the executive branch, so not involved in the active legislative process, but serve as a president of the Senate, sign every bill that goes to the governor, and have been out every day helping Vermonters understand what's happening, how to engage. I've been a champion for Proposal 5, encouraging Vermonters to get your ballots in November and talk about it, make sure people know what we're doing here in Vermont to ensure that whatever happens in Washington, and I know what I'm going to be doing in Washington, but whatever happens in Washington, that reproductive rights are codified and protected here in Vermont.
Thank you. Now, Lieutenant Governor Gray, you have 30 seconds to ask Senator Balint a question.
Sure. I think the beauty of what we're doing here this evening is that we get to see each other. I know that you're going to have some questions. We're asking you to hire us, so grill away shortly. But unfortunately, when I was driving down this evening, I received a message from my staff about a 7-day story that is now confirming that over over $600,000 of outside money has come into this race for my opponent. That's the most in any primary in Vermont's history. It's an effort to influence your votes. It's an effort to influence the outcomes of the primary. And so I've been pretty clear about where I stand. And I guess my question for Senator Balint is, what specific steps would you take in Congress immediately, if elected, to counteract Citizens United, which I think this is a result of?
Yeah, I really appreciate the question. I have been completely and totally clear on this issue for every year that I've ever run for the legislature and now for Congress, is that we need campaign finance reform. I don't support the super PAC spending in this race. I didn't invite it. I don't think it's healthy for democracy. I don't think that we as Vermonters should have folks from outside of our state impacting our elections. And so I'm really clear on that. And, you know, I want to just also be clear that, you know, you and I are running really different races right now. And I have over 6,500 individual donors that have given to my campaign this quarter, and you have just over 1,000, which means your donors are giving a lot more money per person than my donors are. I have always been focused on trying to run grassroots politics in here in Vermont, and yes, we absolutely need to work very hard to overturn Citizens United. And like you, I support public financing of elections. That's where we need to be going. You and I have both raised an obscene amount of money in this race, and it's not healthy for democracy. And I will do anything in my power to make it possible for regular people like myself to run for office without having to raise $1 million to do so.
Thank you very much. So now we turn to the third element in our program tonight, in which the panelists will ask the candidates questions that have been submitted by the audience. Clara, would you like to begin?
Sure. Well, first, thank you to the audience members who took the time to write questions. It was fun being handed them, like getting notes in class. Not that I would know what that's like. Senator Balint, we'll stick with you. Not all of our fellow Americans fully respect the gravity of global warming. How will you explain it to them without being denounced as an elitist?
Oh, I love this question. I love this question. This is the heart of it here in Vermont. It really is. And how we talk about climate change across class difference, across racial difference within our own communities is going to be the thing that determines if we make progress on this or not. And so, you know, one of the things that I've thought so deeply about in the last few years, there's a group at Yale that has been investigating how conservatives and liberals think about climate change. And even when they agree that there's a problem, they see steps to be taken quite differently. So when we talk about the collective doing work for the whole, that's not necessarily resonant with a conservative voter. When we talk about having the ability to protect your family from climate change, from intense heat, from rising floodwaters, when it comes back to family, they're much more willing to engage in the issue. And I think here in Vermont too, we need to do less shaming and blaming, and we need to really engage people who live in rural areas about the kinds of supports they need for climate resiliency. And that's definitely true in my county when I see all the low-lying areas being hammered with every rainstorm. We need to be talking about resiliency and then talk about how we transition off of fossil fuels. Just a little bit.
Thank you. And Lieutenant Governor?
It's funny, as I travel the state and talk to Vermonters of all backgrounds, political stripes, different communities, climate change is the #1 thing that comes up. I feel it's really important that we don't talk about Vermonters, we talk with them and we listen and we gauge. And what I hear is that tick-borne illness impacts everyone. Rising water levels, extreme weather events. I was up in Franklin County talking to a roundtable of dairy farmers, and regardless of their political affiliation, they're talking about it every single day. And I think the same is true for our maple sugars, our ski areas. I think taking the politics out of the conversation is, let's just put it aside and let's just focus on the issues. And I think that is our moment and that is our time. But one thing that we've been doing very well here in Vermont, and thinking of some of our climate leaders like Burton Snowboards, they're part of Protect Our Winters, which is a national organization and different groups, and they're in Washington, and they're engaging with Republicans who enjoy the outdoors, and they're saying, let's talk about the things that we love, the things that we care about, and begin the conversation on global warming there. But my biggest feeling, and I want to leave you with this, is that we need leaders in Congress right now who are going to focus on the issues and really bring the strongest coalitions to the table, and that means getting back to the things that matter to all of us every single day: our health, our well-being, our environment, the things that we love.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, Lieutenant Governor, I'll stay with you, and this is a question about environmental justice specifically. So there is not a federal law that recognizes and promotes environmental justice. Would you support a federal environmental justice bill, and what needs to be included in such a bill?
In 90 seconds, I would support environmental justice bill. I think we've seen positive steps coming out of the Biden administration, but there isn't a framework right now. And I think we've done an incredible job here in the state of finally passing an environmental justice bill. Senator Keisha Hinsdale has been an incredible leader, and of course there are senators here who've also been part of that. But it's everything. It's looking at food security, it's looking at housing. I think the challenge so often is that when we think about environmental impact, we limit it to one sector or another. But truly, to have a strong environmental justice bill, we have to look at every sector, and it has to be a whole of government approach. So it's not one I would limit to one sector or one part of government, but something that Congress takes on as a whole of government approach.
Thank you. Senator.
I agree with the Lieutenant Governor. It cuts across everything. And we have inherited injustice that has been hundreds of years in the making. And yes, we need a environmental justice bill. We also need to redress the issue of redlining and how certain segments of our population ended up in substandard housing. That puts them at risk for the smokestacks that belch the smoke that goes into their lungs. And so it's education, it's commerce, it's environmental. It cuts across all segments of our society. And I think here in Vermont, one of the most heartbreaking conversations that I had was when we were working on the environmental justice bill, when we were working on racial justice here in Vermont, and heard from Vermonters, why are you spending time on that? Why aren't you spending time on things that really matter? And so this is our challenge, those of us here in this room, to make sure we are speaking to our neighbors in really hard conversations, meaningful conversations about the injustice that has been building for hundreds of years. And we need to be willing to put ourselves out there and engage on these issues, even when it seems unpopular locally.
Thank you.
Go ahead, Clara.
All right, Senator Balint, sticking with you. This is not an environmentally related question, but I think it would be amiss if we ended this evening without talking about this. So, as a member of Congress, what initiatives would you take to ensure that an event like January 6th won't happen again?
I'm so glad you asked this question. The thing that I hear from voters more than anything else is their fear that we're at risk at losing the democracy, that the republic is falling apart. And there is incredible anxiety and fear about where we're going. And at a minimum, we need to make sure that the recommendations from the January 6th Commission actually be taken up by the Justice Department If not, I don't honestly know where we're heading as a society. And I will just say, for me, it's very personal. So my grandfather was killed in the Holocaust in the last few weeks of the war. He didn't survive. His concentration camp was the last one liberated. And I grew up in a household in which we were taught democracies do not fail overnight. They fail little by little as rights are eroded, norms are upended, people are scapegoated, the press is being attacked. That's where we're at right now. And so this issue, more than any other issue, is the reason why I am running for this position.
Thank you, Senator. Lieutenant Governor.
I think accountability is, of course, a tremendous part of it. And I agree that the recommendations come out of the committee hearings need to be followed through on. My concern and fear is, what if we try to prosecute and we don't win? That's obviously a concern, but I think the information coming to light is extremely important, and it's helping Americans understand and remember each day what happened, and that's extremely important. But we often talked about prevention, and what is prevention, right? Prevention is accountability. Prevention is also preventing this from happening again. And I remember I was sworn in the day after the insurrection. I was in Montpelier, and I thought, what is my responsibility right now? What is my responsibility to ensure that the next generation feels connectivity, feels ownership over our democracy? So I started a program called Lieutenant Governor for a Day, and every Wednesday had classrooms from across the state, kids of all ages into the State House. Like, this is your State House, this is your government. I remember the first time walking into the US Capitol at 22 years old, working for Peter Welch, and walking up the steps to the House chamber, and they were all worn out from where members of Congress year after year and staff year after year had walked up the steps, and I thought, this is an incredibly special place, and I feel like part of our responsibility is how to bring those who don't feel that democracy represents them, that this democracy is accessible, bringing them back to government, getting them involved in our campaigns, and everything we do every single day so that we regain ownership of this democracy that's ours.
Thank you. Last question.
Thank you. So Lieutenant Gray, we'll stay with you. The Addison County Sheriff has been charged with sexual assault and continues in the position. How can we hold police accountable, and what structures would you change if elected?
The situation here in Vermont is very tricky. I do believe that where a law enforcement officer is lost the trust and faith of the public in such a significant way that it's important for him or her to step back and realize that their one responsibility is to serve. And in this case, losing the public trust obviously is a tremendous concern. A lot of people have asked about ending qualified immunity. I believe that it's something we should consider. However, I don't believe that we should consider it just for law enforcement. We need to also consider our responsibilities as elected officials, as judges, in all avenues and facets of government. I do not support defunding the police. I never have. I don't think that's the way to go. I do support significant training, being clear about what is the responsibility of police and what's the responsibility of our mental health and support service providers, our social workers, making sure that law enforcement are doing their job and being held accountable. But as elected officials, we're also making sure that we're fully funding and fully supporting health and human services and all of the wraparound services that we oftentimes are putting on police today, not only in the state, but of course nationally.
Thank you, Lieutenant Governor Gray. Senator Balint.
Yes, can you repeat the question?
Yes, so this has to do with police accountability. And the Addison County Sheriff has been charged with sexual assault and continues in the position. How can we hold police accountable, and what structures would you change if elected?
So obviously, it's an elected position here in Vermont, and that makes it very difficult for that community to deal with this situation. They have somebody who's been accused of something quite serious, and they have no mechanism for recall. I'd love to see us within the legislature, and I will only be in the legislature for another few months, but talk to my colleagues on government operations about what mechanism we can put in place in statute for just such this situation, because I don't think communities should be dealing with this situation because there's no mechanism for redress. In the broader conversation about accountability, I'm really glad that in the legislature this year, we finally had a conversation about qualified immunity, 50 years overdue, to really examine, is this serving us as Americans to have no mechanism for someone whose civil rights, constitutional rights have been violated by law enforcement to simply get a day in court? That's what we're talking about. We're talking about having a day in court. And so I think we, again, I'm going to go back to a theme that I started with. We are the people who write the laws. We are the people that decide if a structure is working or not. And I don't think anyone honestly believes that we shouldn't examine qualified immunity and see if it's working for all Americans.
Thank you. This concludes the question element of our program tonight. I'd like to thank, first of all the students and faculty members and staff members who submitted questions for consideration tonight, and also thank members of the audience who submitted questions that we have just been addressing. And a big thanks to both of you for your very thoughtful and thought-provoking and intelligent and informed discussion. If there's any place in which democracy works in the good old-fashioned Vermont way, it was here this evening and the interchange between the two of you. So I really want to express on behalf of all of us our appreciation. At this point in the program, each candidate will be given 90 seconds to make closing remarks, and in reverse order from the order in which they gave opening remarks. So we'll start with you, Lieutenant Governor Gray.
Thank you. And Vermont Law School and community, thank you again. Vermont Law and Graduate School and community, thank you again for having me. It's a pleasure to be back on campus. This is a historic moment for us as a state. Not only are you going to elect what I believe is your first congresswoman, but there's a number of statewide offices open, so get involved, get out to vote, get your ballots in, join a campaign. But what I want you to walk away with and really understand is that what's happening in Montpelier, what's happening in our state house is different than what happens in Congress and what happens in Washington. Every day in Congress, you have to be ready to pick up a foreign policy issue, a tough judicial issue, a national security issue, an issue that is touching us here at home, and hit it out of the park. And I have that experience, not only working on Capitol Hill, working for the International Committee of the Red Cross, working as an assistant attorney general, working as a federal law clerk, but also serving statewide as lieutenant governor, which means that I'm not a representative for Brattleboro or for Burlington, but for every community. And I've been showing up, listening, trying to get the best understanding of what's happening, and then bringing that experience back to Montpelier every single day. I also know that it is time for the next generation to step up. It is time for us to step up, and that's why I'm stepping up. So I thank you for your attention, your interest. Get out and vote. If you have questions, I'll be hanging out this evening. Ask away. I'm asking you to hire me, and I'm asking you tonight for your vote. Thank you.
Thank you. Senator Balint.
Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for listening. You really could be anywhere on a beautiful Vermont night, and you're here, and that really matters. I'm a mom. I'm a proud member of the LGBTQ community. I'm a longtime teacher, state senator, first woman ever to be elected president pro tem of the Senate. Shouldn't have taken so long, but I'm really proud that I was able to serve in that capacity. I didn't grow up with political connections. I didn't grow up with powerful people in my life who said that I could do this someday. I'm just a regular person who taught public school for years. And I want more regular people to serve in Congress. I think there's an incredible disconnection that's happening in Congress right now. There aren't enough regular people talking about what life is really like on the margins, what is like for people who are truly struggling to get by in this time of gross wealth inequality. And you have a real choice. You have somebody who has 8 years of legislative experience delivering on some of the most important issues before us. Minimum wage increases, climate action, strongest reproductive rights in the nation, housing investments. I did that with the citizen legislature that serves in Montpelier and represents regular people day in and day out, and that's who I will be for you in Congress. So thank you so much for coming out tonight, and I look forward to chit-chatting with you when we're all done.
Thank you both, and I'd like to ask now President Smola to offer a few concluding remarks.
In bringing the proceedings to a close, I will note that we have extended an invitation to the Republican candidates in the interest of bipartisan inclusivity, so should they wish to have us host a debate for them, we'd be pleased to do so. I want to thank our moderator, Peter Teachout, for your moderation, and I want to thank my colleague, Stephanie Clark, for your wonderful questions. But I do have to say, the two of you are trained professionals. But you could make the argument that who won the debate tonight was Clara Derby, who was here. Someday I want to vote for you. You have done your fellow law students proud, and you have a great future in this world, and I appreciate the intelligence of your questions and how you acquitted yourselves tonight. I want to let you know that I've been in Vermont now for all of 3 weeks and have fallen in love with it, and so has my spouse. But of course, one has a certain nostalgia for one's own place, my own sweet home, Chicago, where we were taught and admonished to vote early and often. Now, you can't vote often, but you can certainly vote twice, in the primary and in the general election, and I encourage you for doing that. And I second the thoughts of both candidates and our moderator in congratulating you on your willingness to participate. You're the future of this country and the future of this state and this community, and your being here speaks a great deal. And finally, let me say to both candidates, again, seconding what Peter has said, it is just remarkable for me, a newcomer to this state, to listen to a debate so intelligent, so far-reaching, and so civilized. And that is a wonderful, wonderful tribute to both of you, and a wonderful tribute to the traditions and politics of this state, to which I am new. And I invite the audience to congratulate and thank these candidates for their public service and for their willingness to participate in our democratic experiment. Have a great evening, everybody. Good night, folks.